After World War II, efforts were made to punish those Nazis who were complicit and were the perpetrators of the Holocaust. Still today there are efforts to bring those who were responsible for the crimes during the conflict to justice, and recently in the news there have been efforts to bring a 100-year-old ex-Nazi death camp guard into court. However, today we look at the 10 notorious Nazis who never faced justice and were never punished for their horrific crimes. Remember to support our channel, please subscribe. Oskar Groning, after World War II, made a number of statements in television interviews in which he openly talked about what he saw and what he did as a member of the SS. He worked and was stationed within Auschwitz, and he was responsible for counting and sorting money from the prisoners, and was in charge of sorting through personal property of prisoners when they arrived inside of Auschwitz. His job did not keep him away from the extermination processes at the camp, and on his first day he saw children being shot dead and brutally murdered. He claimed to try and leave the camp, however he stayed and continued to be complicit in the brutal activities that occurred at Auschwitz. He knew openly of the gas chambers, and later in life spoke out about his activities to combat Holocaust denial. He became known as the bookkeeper of Auschwitz, but he did speak openly about the murder that occurred, and he justified some of his actions in the camp, and he clearly held the Nazi ideology that caused great suffering to the Jews. He was charged by state prosecutors in 2014 for having been an accessory to murder inside Auschwitz, and it was said that he was economically advancing Nazi Germany through his work confiscating valuable items. During his trial he was seen as a frail old man, and ex-prisoners testified about the camp. Oskar Groning was deemed guilty and was sentenced to 4 years in jail. However, he was hospitalised before his sentence began, and he later died, never spending any time in jail for his crimes. Laszlo Satar was a Hungarian citizen and Nazi war criminal who was sentenced to death in absentia in 1948. However, he could never be found after the war. He was involved in organising the deportations of around 15,000 Jews to Auschwitz, and of also exercising his authority in a forced labour camp using violence and beatings. He was also accused of brutalising people inside the city of Kassa in Hungary. After the war he fled to Canada in 1948, claiming to be a Yugoslavian national, and he settled in Montreal and worked as an art dealer. He was given a Canadian citizenship, which in 1997 was taken away as he was caught lying on his application. He then left Canada and was never charged with any crimes there. He was located in 2012 in Budapest, having returned to Hungary, and the Simon Wiesenthal Centre, an organisation who have become known for trying to bring Nazi criminals to justice, found his address, which was then exposed. There were attempts by Slovakia to prosecute and extradite him, however the charges were later dropped, as it was believed he had been sentenced previously when he had not. He died in August 2013, and many were disappointed that he never faced trial. Alfred Stark was a former corporal of the Gebirgsjäger division, and at the age of 92 he is accused of having ordered and participated in the execution of 117 Italian prisoners of war on the island of Kefalonia in Greece, which was occupied by Italians. This allegedly took place in 1943, before the Italians and Germans broke their alliance, and in the aftermath the Germans massacred around 9,500 officers of the Acqui Division and prisoners of war on Kefalonia. A military court in Rome in 2012 sentenced Stark to life in prison in absentia, but Germany refused to extradite him to face this. It's alleged though that he died in 2018, and this was only recently found out. Klaus Barbie became known as the Butcher of Lyon. He was involved in torturing prisoners of the Gestapo, including members of the French resistance and Jews. He was based in the city of Lyon, and historians estimate that he was responsible for the deaths of up to 14,000 people, being involved in roundups that saw dozens arrested and executed each day. His most prominent captive was Jean Moulin, who was a high-ranking member of the French resistance, and of which he was awarded the Iron Cross for. After the war he was recruited by the US Counterintelligence Corps, and he was used to spread anti-communist ideas in Europe. He was sentenced to death by a French court for war crimes. However, being propped up by the Americans, he was smuggled using the rat lines to Bolivia. It's unknown whether the Americans protected him because of what he knew, or because they wished to cover up the fact they recruited him to work alongside. When he arrived in South America, he lived very well, and was very well known within the Bolivian hierarchy, and it's alleged he was even involved in the capturing of Che Guevara in 1967. He was extradited back to Europe in 1983 and stood trial in France for his work as a head of the Gestapo in Lyon. Despite being acquitted of some charges, he was convicted, dying in prison, but he remains on this list as he did escape his death sentence. Johann Robert Reiss lived out much of his life close to the heart of the Nazis in Munich. He was located at the age of 92, having lived in a village south of Munich. However, he was involved in massacring many men. Resistance fighters in a Tuscan town shot 2 German soldiers, and the Nazis retaliated by massacring 184 civilians inside the town, including 27 children. Statements were taken from survivors, and the name Johann Robert Reiss emerged as someone who allegedly ordered the attack. He was sentenced in a Rome court in 2011 for his crimes in absentia, but yet again Germany refused to extradite him, and they also refused to pay back €40 million in compensation to the victims of the massacre. He died in 2019, aged 98, having never faced justice. Alois Bruno was an Austrian SS officer who was involved in implementing the final solution. He was referred to as the right-hand man of Adolf Eichmann. He was involved in sending 100,000 European Jews from Austria, Greece, France and Slovakia to ghettos and then concentration camps. These mass deportations eventually resulted in thousands being sent to their deaths in the gas chambers. He then later became the commandant of Drancy internment camp, where the Jews were gathered before being sent to the gas chambers in the east. Brunner's arrival there quickened up the speed of deportations, and he was known for murdering and executing Jews in reprisals for attacks from the French resistance. Brunner managed to escape the Allies after World War II and fled to Germany in 1954, heading first to Egypt and then Syria. Despite being sentenced to death in absentia by the French, he never faced his fate, however was attacked. He was injured, losing an eye and fingers as letter bombs were sent to him by the Israelis. The Syrian government were close to extraditing him, but this ended as the Berlin Wall fell. He managed to survive all of the attempts to extradite him before being granted asylum in Syria. He died in 2001 or 2010 and was buried in Damascus. Walter Rauff was an SS commander in Nazi Germany. He served as an aide for Reinhard Heydrich, the Butcher of Prague, in the SD in the Reich Security Main Office. It was estimated that he was responsible for the deaths of around 100,000 people during World War II. He was involved in the development of gas fans, mobile killing chambers that were used against Jews, disabled people and political enemies. Evidence from the CIA pointed to Rauff as the man who created this, and even oversaw the modification of the trucks. He was also involved in persecuting Jews in North Africa, forcing many into slave labour where they died. Rauff's men also stole millions of dollars worth of jewels, artefacts, gold and valuables. He later became in charge of the Gestapo and SD's efforts in northwest Italy, and remained there until the end of the war. He narrowly avoided being lynched by the Italians and was arrested, however went into hiding in a number of Italian convents. He was recruited by the Syrian intelligence forces, and even worked as a military advisor to the president. He managed to escape to Lebanon, and then Ecuador, before moving to Chile. Extradition requests were made, and plans to assassinate him by Mossad were drawn up. He managed to avoid extradition a number of times, and died in May 1984 from a heart attack. Heinrich Muller served in the SS as a high-ranking police official and member. He was the chief of the Gestapo, the secret police of Nazi Germany. In this role he was involved in the torture, execution and suffering of hundreds of thousands. He was central to the planning and preparation of the Holocaust, as well as its execution. His direct superior was Heydrich until his assassination, and he helped to arrange the mass deportation of Jews to ghettos and the death camps. Muller personally ordered 80,000 Jews from the Polish city of Katowice to concentration camps. He knew about the Einsatzgruppen's crimes and instructed soldiers to shoot civilians in a less public manner. Muller was also in charge of rounding up those plotters who were suspected of attempting to assassinate Hitler during the July 20th plot. Over 5,000 were arrested, with 200 executed, and he reigned over the Gestapo with much fear. He was part of the last remaining members of the Nazi government inside of the Führer bunker, and was seen chatting to Hitler inside of the bunker. As Berlin crumbled to the Red Army, he was last seen in the bunker on the 1st of May 1945, a day after Hitler's suicide. From that day onwards, there has never been a trace of Heinrich Muller found, and his whereabouts remain a mystery. Chances are that he was killed during the fall of Berlin, and that his body, if recovered, was never identified. Attempts were made to try and find him, however today it still remains a myth what happened to him. One of the most notorious names associated with the Holocaust is Joseph Mengele. The Angel of Death is how he is known, and for good reason. Inside of Auschwitz he performed sadistic and twisted medical experiments on prisoners that resulted in the death and suffering of so many. He also took part in the selection processes in which he chose who would be killed. He showed an interest in identical twins and often experimented on these. He was known to have been kind to the children, but then within days would have them killed to conduct experiments on. He even attempted to change eye colours and killed people just so he could study their eyes. His experiments went sadly further, but as the Red Army approached he was transferred to a different camp. He then travelled into Czechoslovakia and was smuggled using the rat lines to Genoa, where he managed to secure a Red Cross passport under the name Helmut Gregor. He then sailed to Argentina and lived out the rest of his life in South America. He worked as a carpenter in Buenos Aires and then later travelled to Brazil to evade capture. He was living a normal life there, and then it was discovered that he suffered a stroke in 1976 while swimming and then drowned. DNA testing confirmed beyond doubt that Mengele had died in Brazil after the Allies thought he died at the end of the Second World War. Martin Bormann was an integral member of Hitler's inner circle. He was the head of the Nazi Party Chancellery and also Hitler's private secretary. He was a man greatly disliked by other members of the Nazi hierarchy and was seen as obsessed with power. He accompanied Hitler everywhere he went and provided briefings and summaries of events that occurred during the war. He also absorbed Rudolf Hess's duties after his failed flight to Scotland and was one of the leading members behind the Nazi attacks on the Christian Church. He also wished for stronger treatment against the Jews and the Slavs during World War II. One of the most important things he did was he controlled who and when people could see Hitler, so ultimately he was the man who granted people access to the dictator of Germany. He remained ever loyal to Hitler inside of the Führer bunker until the very end, and he was one of the first people to see Hitler's dead body. He was even the man who lit the paper that ignited the fuel to burn Hitler. However, what happened to him is slightly mysterious. He was part of a party that on the 2nd of May 1945 tried to avoid Soviet capture by leaving Berlin as the city crumbled. With him he carried a copy of Hitler's last will and testament, and the group travelled through the subway stations. It's assumed that near to a station in a city, on a bridge, that either Bormann was killed or he took his own life. He was buried nearby on the 8th of May 1945, but was not found until 1973. At the Nuremberg Trials he was sentenced to death in absentia, and was listed as missing for decades. In 1998, the skull of a body exhumed near to the site was analysed and genetically tested, and this proved to have been Martin Bormann's. So I hope you found this list interesting. Remember as always to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe as well as like and share, and once again, thank you for watching.